Muchadeyi Masunda, welcome back to In Conversation with Trevor.
Thank you. I couldn't believe my good fortune that I'm being invited for the second time round. You know, I must have done something reasonably good last time.
Well, you did, Much, but also, you know, I promised our huge audience all over the world, in Zimbabwe, on the continent, and then the diaspora, that we would have you back. We had you on almost 3 months ago, just when we got into the lockdown. And the primary reason for that show was to get insights from you as a former mayor of Harare into whether we were ready for COVID. And I did say to the audience that we're having you back. We're having you back, Much, because I have no doubt that you've got an exemplary life. You have so many lessons to share to Zimbabweans and to inspire a lot of Zimbabweans. You've had a life that has not had the slightest whiff of scandal, and that is a lot, given the kind of country that we live in. And I suppose starting on a lighter note, I was going through the comments of the viewers, and they were laughing at me that you are Shona speaking, but you can pronounce Bulawayo better than me, who says Bulawayo. So so to say to viewers out there, we go through your comments, all of them, and we take note of the people that you want us to interview. And one thing that I did pick up from people, Much, they say, you know, your father was in Bulawayo. Your Shona speaking father was in Bulawayo in 1915. What got him there?
Well, he trekked all the way from Manicaland, Odzinyazura area to be specific, through the then Salisbury, and wound up in Bulawayo in 1915 in search of his fortunes. So he was working for a hotelier, and soon after he got to Bulawayo, it didn't take him long to set himself up, you know, and he then became a businessman in his own right. You know, set up a butchery in what is now popularly known as Masunda, near McDonald Hall.
Yes, fascinating, isn't it? And then any instructive lessons, memories that have remained with you from your dad, Much, and maybe your mom?
My dad had a tremendous network, you know, of friends, you know, business-wise and otherwise, and I think the extensive network that he built was an indelible lesson for me, an unforgettable lesson. And on my mother's side, she had come here with her parents, who originated from the Eastern Cape, and her parents were part of a team of missionaries that came to this part of the world in the 1880s, early 1890s. My mom was born here, though, of closer parentage. And so that's how they met in Bulawayo. And so, you know, we grew up speaking Xhosa first, and Chimanyika second with our father, and Sindebele third with our playmates, and English at school. So in a way, I became Ndebele by osmosis, by virtue of having had the good fortune of being born and brought up in Bulawayo. And that's why maybe I pronounce these Ndebele words better than you, Trevor.
And I think one thing that you've clearly taken over from your dad, rather inherited from your dad, is building a network. You have an amazing Rolodex throughout the world. I mean, you are amazing at building networks and connecting with people at all levels.
I saw those networks work for my dad, you know, and I grew up thinking I've got to do the same, you know. And to give you an example, I mean, Peter Lobo, the benefactor who donated all these fire engines to various local authorities, starting with Harare. His father, Benny Lobo, and his mother, Miriam, served with my dad on the then Bulawayo Welfare Society. Those days, there was no Department of Social Welfare in any ministry. and no social welfare department in the city. So you had these public-spirited senior citizens who got together and made it their business to look after the more vulnerable members of the community. And then, of course, Benny Lobel was the founder of Lobel's, and Lobel's bread today is the legacy that he left behind.
Yes, and just to remind viewers, Much, that you served as Harare mayor 2008 to 2013. You would have preferred to serve as Bulawayo mayor, but that was not to be. And one of the criticisms from our viewers, they were saying, Much is waxing lyrically about what others have messed up on as far as being mayors and MPs. What legacy has Much left for Harare? What were your successes and failures as mayor of Harare?
At the risk of sounding as if I'm blowing my own trumpet, we'll start with Peter Lobel. I mean, there's no way that Peter Lobel would have done what he did if it hadn't been for the links that I had with him. In fact, I bumped into him fortuitously at a social event. And he was quite taken aback, to find out how mayor of Harare, because he'd just come back from New York, where he had gone to establish a very successful bakery and confectionery business. And then we started talking about the sort of things that he's passionate about, and firefighting equipment, was one such interest that he was very keen on. And one thing led to the next, and he donated the first fire engine in memory of his friend, now late General Solomon Juru. And the rest is history. I mean, there are over 20 fire engines and accessories that Peter has sourced for a number of local authorities. And then the second one was my fortuitous meeting with a senior representative from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She had me speak in Nanjing, and then had me speak in Strasbourg, and had me speak in Barcelona, and just was taken by what I had to say. And she came up to me and said, look, I need to come out to Harare and see for myself what it is that you do as mayor, and how you can possibly set these lofty goals for yourself in the face of what was then the world's worst hyperinflationary environment. And she came, and the long and short of it is that we got $5 million US dollars from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And out of that $5 million US dollars, we built 486 houses for the members of the Zimbabwe Homeless People Federation in Jorasekwa Extension. And at the tail end of my stint as mayor, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation made available $20 million US dollars that was going to be channeled through the existing building societies, specifically for the lower echelons of our community. But sadly, my successor and his team did not pick up that ball to run with it, and as a result, those funds never materialized. And I could go on. I mean, there were umpteen other things that I did. For instance, during my stint, we had a workforce of 11,887. I'll never forget that figure. And there's not a single occasion that they went without pay. And that again was achieved through the networks that I had. I became the chief debt collector for the city. I got hold of the city treasurer and the town clerk, and we sat and I said, right guys, who are the 20% ratepayers who contribute 80% of our revenues? And so I made sure that towards the end of each month, I approached those ratepayers direct, and I say, right, I know that you haven't been billed, but you are going to be billed. I want that money in advance to pay the workers. Yeah. And bingo, it worked. And then the other success, which I can safely claim, is it came via the assistance, invaluable assistance that I got from the then resident director of the World Bank, Mungai Lenai. He, to his eternal credit, mobilized $17.1 million US dollars for the city to upgrade its its water distribution system, and that again, goes down to these networks that we talked about. And we also got assistance from the World Bank in the sense that they sent 3 work study practitioners at their own expense, 2 from Italy, 1 from Denmark, and to have a look at what we could and should do in terms of right-sizing the complement of staff. Because 11,887 was certainly blotted. There's no way that the city should have been carrying so many workers. And by the time I finished my stint, we'd whittled down the numbers to 9,000 without retrenching anybody. Just allowing attrition to take its course.
Any key improvements in infrastructure, Much? I mean, roads, water reticulation, and things like that?
Yes, in fact, we had a budget of $64 million for roads, and on a good month we used to collect anything between $21 and $24 million. And during my time, I can proudly say that we didn't have the proliferation of potholes that we now see. And one staggering statistic that the viewers and listeners may be blissfully unaware of is that the road network, in other words, tarred and paved roads for the city of Harare, Greater Harare, is in excess of 10,000 kilometers, which is more than the whole of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
And it didn't have as many potholes as we have right now. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
The other issue that you raised, which I want to follow up on, is you spoke about the valuation role and the fact that there had not been any revaluation of Harare properties, the mansions that we're seeing. And the question is, were that done, what impact would that have on the assets of the council? Why is it such an important thing?
It's extremely important because that's a major source of revenue for the city. We've tended to take our eyes off the ball as far as updating the valuation role is concerned. I mean, if you go anywhere within Greater Harare, you see a number of mansions that have sprouted, mansions that would grace, Hollywood and other, more developed, cities, Glatwin, for instance, and Boulderbrook and Foliage on Crest, and so the list goes on. But what did not happen and ought to have happened is for all those properties to be captured on the roll, and therefore rated accordingly. And it's an exercise that I have impressed upon the current mayor to have addressed as a matter of extreme urgency.
So it's still not been done?
To the best of my knowledge, it's not quite where it should be. But he did give me an assurance, that it will be done. I've been doing my best to handhold him and assist him wherever possible.
What is the one thing that remained outstanding or frustrating as you walked out of the office of the mayor of Harare?
I think the main thing that I would have loved to have done more about is the health delivery services. We had started working on it, and we completed 2 polyclinics that had been left in a lurch, with funding that had come from the World Bank, and that funding dried up at some point. And I'm pleased to say that during my stint as mayor, the services that were being offered at the maternity services units like Temperament in Bari and also in Maverick were second to none. And again, that came about in no small measure as a result of the contribution that was made by a number of Zimbabweans in the diaspora, guys that had gone to university with, who were tickled pink about the whole idea of me being mayor. And I turned around and said, what are you going to do about it? And the guys who were attached to the WHO head office in Geneva mobilized resources in Europe. They had a lot in Canada, mobilized resources there, and they adopted clinics. The guys in Canada adopted Highfield Polyclinic because that's where they were born. And the guys the majority of the guys in Geneva adopted Edith Opperman, which is part of the Harare Polyclinic because that's where they were born. And so the services that are offered there are just as good as any that you'd get in any of the private hospitals within Greater Harare. I'm proud of that. But do you see the cost, Trevor, of providing all those services, used to come out of the beer profits that were generated by the opaque beer brewery that was an integral part of the municipal liquor undertaking department. But with the advent of independence and the deregularization of the sale of opaque beer in urban areas, that brewery was taken over by Chibuk breweries. And so we're just renting out as a city, renting out the brewery to Delta Corporation. And obviously we don't generate as much by way of revenues as we used in the past. But again, through networking, I managed to get the ICRC and UNICEF to contribute 75% towards the procurement of the medicines and other medical accessories that we needed to run 2 hospitals and the 12 polyclinics and the 30 primary healthcare centers.
So I hear you, Much, talking, which is a great thing about the money that flows from the networks that you had. And for me, the question that raises is, there must clearly be a funding gap. Why should you be looking out to outsiders to fund the work of the council instead of the council generating its own revenues to fund its capex issues? Is there a gap of that nature, and how does that gap arise?
That's a very good point, Trevor. It all goes back again to what I said earlier. If the traditional and proven revenue sources for the city, like the rates, if everybody who owns a mansion pays the right rate, and if the brewery, through referral marketing, was operating in the way that Ingwebu breweries operates in Bulawayo, then there wouldn't be all these problems. But it goes back to what I said earlier at the beginning of our interview, that once you take your eye off the ball, then it becomes a problem. So I wasn't going to sit back and do nothing when there was an opportunity that presented itself through the networks that I had with Peter Salama, the then head of UNICEF, and Thomas Meckelbach, the head of ICRC, and those 2 gentlemen helped me a lot. So it wasn't. I was going to sit back and expect that to happen to continue in perpetuity, because those sort of things are not sustainable, as you quite rightly pointed out. So we just need to make sure that we take a closer look at what we have at our disposal in terms of material resources, financial resources, and human resources, and make sure that those things get to work the way they should.
We find ourselves, you and I would have loved us to be meeting face to face, but again, because of the need to physical distance and social distance, because of COVID-19, we can't do that. There's a talk now that we ought to be planning to rebuild after COVID. And there's a mantra of build back better, environmental awareness, triple bottom line, and issues of that nature. As from where you see it, what should be Zimbabwe's priorities as far as rebuilding is concerned post-COVID-19?
In a way, Trevor, the advent of COVID-19 has been a godsend. It's a glorious opportunity for us right across the board, professionally, politically, and otherwise, to take stock of where we are and say to ourselves, what is it that we should be doing in order to cope with a pandemic like COVID-19. And a lot of these things that we now have to contend with cut across the political, ethnic, racial, you name it. And a good starting point for us is not to seek to reinvent the wheel. And a very good guideline and a good starting point would be the Sustainable Development Goals. There are quite a number of them, and Development Goal number 10, for instance, exhorts us to do everything humanly possible to address inequalities that exist in our community. And that is a serious issue, Trevor. For instance, Michelle Obama is suffering from low depression at the moment. And one of the reasons why that is so is because of the inequalities, racial inequalities that exist in the United States. And from where she sits, she's acutely and painfully aware of what it is all about. And of course, we are aware of the number of needless deaths that have occurred at the hands of the police in the state. And the other development goal that we need to really focus on is building sustainable cities and communities. And that includes, Trevor, making sure that the infrastructure, health-wise, transport-wise, and otherwise, is in place. And it requires investment and planning. But we've tended during the best part of 40 years of independence here to focus on consumptive matters. People worry more about what sort of chariot they drive than what services they're actually rendering, through that office which they may happen to occupy at a given moment. So it's a huge wake-up call, and also inextricably intertwined with all these things is the SDG number 16, which talks about the maintenance of peace and justice and strong institutions, because all these things cannot happen in a vacuum. We have an ironically cruel situation in Zimbabwe where we are not at war, and yet the symptoms and manifestations of all sorts of things that have gone horribly wrong, are those that are symptomatic of a country that is at war. And if the truth be told, we've been at war with ourselves, and that is why we need to put all our heads together and forget about this toxic party politics, and focus on how to get the best people possible from wherever within Zimbabwe. They're there, and put our heads and say, right, guys, how are we going to sort this thing out? And that calls for
any opportunities. Sorry, proceed. Proceed.
No, I think that calls for leadership, especially from President Emerson Mnangagwa. He needs to realize that from where he sits, he should be looking around and do something that is not dissimilar to what the legendary Prime Minister of Singapore did. Was a very good judge of talent. Lee, Kuan Yew, yeah, and just get the right people. They're there. Let's see meritocracy being practiced and not being talked about.
But we have a situation, Much, where there is mistrust between the private sector and government. There is the them and us attitude at a time when we really need to be working together to rebuild back better. How do we get rid of that mistrust and realize that we are one family?
Yeah, I think we need to have a candid and constructive dialogue, between the corporate and professional sectors on one hand, and government. There's been this us and them attitude because people in the corporate and professional sectors have tended to be intellectually arrogant, if I can put it that way, for want of a better term. They tend to look down on politicians. And politicians have a lot of courage and that courage manifests itself in them lifting their hands up and making themselves available for election. Whereas most of us tend to shy away from throwing our hats in the ring, and as a result, we're always complaining about the caliber of councillors and legislators that we have, and yet we haven't got the guts to get in there and make sure that we pay back to the country what we've gained so much from the country. I mean, that reminds me of a very sobering and humbling.
I've lost you, Much. I've lost you. Something has happened with your volume.
First, to get to know more about the councillors that elected me. I had.
Sorry, can I ask you to start with the problem with the internet? It broke. If you could just start that thought, please.
Right. I was going to say that in the course of bridging these gaps that exist, between us and the key players in government, we need to make sure that we cultivate new and meaningful relationships, which are anchored on the acceptance that both business and government are endowed with different but complementary strengths,
right,
which must be galvanized and harnessed for the benefit of the country.
Right.
And as I said earlier, the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic has provided us with a glorious opportunity, as the business and professional sectors and government, to cast aside our differences and work together in the national interest. In fact, the international experience, Trevor, has shown us that countries which have attained a degree of success are those which have managed successfully the convergence between business and government in a strategic and sustainable way. Now, this reminds me of quite a humbling experience that I went through soon after I found myself as mayor of Harare, because I was elected by the 46 councillors who represented the 46 wards. The 45 of those councillors were MDC, and one solitary councillor from Hopley represented ZANU-PF. And so one of the first things I felt I needed to do was to have a one-on-one with each of those councillors, just to find out what their respective claims to fame were, what their fortes were, so that I can slot them into the appropriate committees. We had 8 of them. And this particular councillor for Ward 4 Maverick taught me an unforgettable lesson. It was his turn to come for the interview with the mayor, and he rocks up in the mayor's parlor wearing a Man U anorak. And I said to him, Honorable Councillor, you are not going to come to townhouse on official business and also a meeting with me dressed like that. And he said, Mayor, I don't know what your problem is. I was democratically elected by the people in Harare. You have no constituency. We elected you, so you're not going to tell me what to do. I will come to these meetings and make my contribution as I see fit. And then this particular councillor, and I won't mention names because it might embarrass, but his main claim to fame is that he was a driver, or rather he'd been a driver and bodyguard to mutual friends of ours, Trevor, you and I. But he had the guts when March 2008 came, and he lifted his hand up and got elected. But the long and short of this is that I had to sit back and think and reflect that I've got to find a way of working with this councillor. And it's true that he's got a constituents out there, and I haven't. But and I'm pleased to say that I facilitated quite a whole lot of things, including a month's exchange visit by him and 3 others to Munich, which is one of the wealthiest and well-run cities in the world. And by the time we finished, we'd become, a strong allies. And he went on to serve another 5 years, I think, with my successor. And so those are the kind of things that we need to contend with. We need to humble ourselves, especially those of us that have had the good fortune of going to school and coming out with all sorts of fancy degrees from this, that, and the other university. That delivering services to the targeted beneficiaries is a different ballgame altogether. You need to actually talk to them and appreciate what their problems are and address those problems.
So your current day-to-day job, Much, is you are chairman of the Commercial Arbitration Center. Not a lot of people understand the roles and the function. Could you just break it down briefly? What's the role of the Commercial Arbitration Center, and what have been the highlights of your work so far?
Well, the Commercial Arbitration Center is simply there to render alternative dispute resolution services. So it complements the administration and delivery of justice in Zimbabwe. And we started it in the early 90s, there were 6 of us. And we felt that we needed, as a country, to be in sync with what was happening in the rest of the world. Not all problems should necessarily be resolved by way of litigation, because litigation by its very nature is adversarial. Somebody comes out of it with a bloodied nose, and it then becomes difficult for you to continue dealing with somebody, going forward after he had punched you in the nose, and not only did you bleed, but you also bled financially by paying for the cost of litigation. So we focus mainly on resolving disputes amicably and cost effectively through conciliation, mediation, and arbitration. And I'm very grateful for the support which we have received, not only from the business community, but also from the legal profession and the judiciary. Because most of the arbitral awards that have been awarded by the, through the center have been enforced, because they then, upon registration with the registrar of the High Court, they assume the same sort of force and effect as a judgment. So I can proudly say that we are one of very few countries in Africa that have a commercial arbitration center that works the way ours has been working since it opened its door to the public on the 1st of July 1995.
And how is it funded, Much? Is it through the fees that you charge for arbitration, or you?
For the first 3 years, it was funded through the business sector, but they insisted that for them to fund it, there had to be someone who would champion the cause, and that's how I became the guinea pig and started this whole thing and gave up my job as managing director of duties, and I'm pleased it's worked out well. And after the first 2 years, we were able to generate enough revenue from the fees and the admin charges and appointment levies, to sustain itself without contribution from either the business sector or the government sector.
Fantastic.
It's been a lot of hard work, though.
But well done for the good work that you're doing. As we sit here, Much, the Judicial Services Commission has published a list from which 5 judges are going to be appointed to the Constitutional Court. Guide us through the process. I mean, and what the public ought to be looking out for. What are the characteristics? What are the attributes? Who really should be sitting as a Constitutional Court judge?
Yeah, it's an interesting development, and actually an epoch-making development. Because this is going to be the first time ever in the history of this country that we're going to have an apex court that is fully fledged and a standalone entity. Because in the past, we used to have constitutional matters being resolved, by the then appellate division of the High Court pre-independence and post-independence by the Supreme Court of Zimbabwe. So we are, in a way, following the footsteps of South Africa, which has a constitutional court headed by the Chief Justice, who currently happens to be Mokoeng. And then we've got judges of the Constitutional Court who have nothing to do with the other courts, namely the appellate division of the Supreme Court, which still has its judicial headquarters in Bloemfontein, and then the various high courts throughout South Africa. Here we have the High Court. We've got one in Harare, Bulawayo, Gweru, Masvingo, and Mutare. And then we've got the Supreme Court. And now we have a situation where, unlike what used to happen in the past, whenever there's a constitutional matter, you'd have the Constitutional Court being made up of anything between 5 to 7 or sometimes more judges drawn from the Supreme Court. We're now going to have a Constitutional Court whose ex officio members will be the current Chief Justice, Luke Malaba, and his deputy, Elizabeth Gwawunza, and 5 more judges who are going to be subjected to cruel and unusual punishment between the 7th and 9th of September, being interviewed in public. And so we're going to have a constitutional court comprising 7 judges.
And what are we looking for in these judges? What are we looking for in terms of character, those kind of traits?
In addition to the normal qualities that are expected of any judge or of the High Court, Supreme Court, we should be looking, I would say, 5 things, Trevor. One is courage. We need individuals who are going to have the moral fortitude to pass fair and balanced judgments without fear or favor. And secondly, we need individuals that are going to be independent-minded enough, to remain resolute, and not susceptible to any pressure from wherever that pressure may come. And thirdly, we need individuals that are incorruptible. There's been a serious scourge of corruption in this country. And so we need individuals who must be able to uphold the highest possible standards of integrity in all aspects of their lives, both on and off the bench. And it's not easy for a lot of people to be as incorruptible as they should be, given the pathetically low remuneration that judges earn, sadly. So the executive needs to address the issue to do with the Consolidated Revenue Fund, which is this primary source of remuneration for judges and other senior holders of office of these institutions that make up, what a well-run country is all about. Then number 4, we need individuals that are politically neutral. So we all have our political wishes, acknowledge that. But once you get to that level, you cannot afford to have a member of the apex court, like the Constitutional Court, being tarred with a certain brush on account of him having been a member of parliament for a certain party or a minister in an administration that was led by a certain president or whatever. So, and then the last attribute, Trevor, has to do with the temperament. And with temperament goes humility. If you are a holder of an office in an apex court, you got to have the right temperament, to be able to operate calmly under intense and immense pressure, and also to be humble enough to realize that the decisions that you make affect the lives of the people that appear before you. So we have a somewhat anomalous situation that amongst the 12 contenders, plus, of course, ex officio, the CJ and the deputy CJ, you have as many as 6 individuals who have got a lot of explaining to do when they come up for the interviews, in the sense that they are listed amongst the recipients of that infamous farm mechanization scheme that was driven by Gideon Gono when he was the governor of our central bank. So those individuals need to make a clean breast of the simple fact that they were recipients of that scheme. And I think for the sake of tolerance and forgiveness, we need to give them an opportunity to make good. You know, in other words, they've got to come up with a plan as to how they're going to pay back those thousands of dollars that they benefited. If they don't, we're going to have an apex court, some of whose members are not going to be respected by the people that appear before them. And the last thing that we want, Trevor, is something that is akin to what happened in South Africa, when we'll have a situation not dissimilar to what happened to Jacob Gezeihlekisa Zuma. Because whenever he appeared in Parliament in Cape Town to address, to deliver the SONA, instead of national address, he was, barragged and humiliated by Julius Malema and other members of the EFF. Pay back the money, pay back the money. We don't want that. So because that's going to actually worsen the kind of polarized atmosphere that we have in the country. And it's also going to add to the endemic lawlessness and lack of discipline.
This is an important institution, Much, and what you're saying is hugely important. So you're saying they need to own up, point number one. Point number two, they need to make a commitment about when and how they're going to pay this money so that they get back the public's respect. That's what you're saying, Much.
Precisely.
Okay, and we hope
it has to happen. There can be no compromise. See, and it all stems from what I mentioned earlier, the poor remuneration for judicial officers. So that's an issue that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
I mean, in South Africa, the judges are amongst some of the most well-paid public functionaries, and they're taken care of handsomely even after they've retired. We've got to do something to along those lines, and that's reduce the need for judges to be tempted in the manner that they were during Gideon Gono's era as governor of our central bank.
That's important, Much, particularly given the fact that you've already alluded to the fact that corruption is a scourge in this country. And we'll be looking to our judges and our lawyers to help us get a handle on this. I mean, we've seen an increase in corruption during COVID. We've seen, my sense, Much, is that there isn't a single part of our lives or profession that's immune from corruption. The police, the journalists, lawyers, the business, the military. There's corruption all over the place. How do we nip this in the bud, or how do we kill this thing called corruption?
I think the government has already got off to a reasonably good and promising start through the establishment of the Anti-Corruption Commission, headed by Justice Lois Matanda Moyo. But what needs to happen is for the Anti-Corruption Commission to be showing more than its teeth. Because at the moment, there are all sorts of cynical things that get said about the Anti-Corruption Commission, this catch and release syndrome and all that. And the one of the issues that needs to be addressed and addressed urgently is to capacitate the functionaries within the Anti-Corruption Commission. Because sadly, some of the investigators, that carry out the investigations into alleged acts of corruption are not quite as glued up as they should be. And as a result, people get away scot-free, on account of a given matter, especially these white-collar crimes. They're not easy to investigate. We should have introduced a system that, again, is, as I said earlier, is not dissimilar to what obtains in more mature jurisdictions, like in the UK, for instance. It's not unheard of for a senior counsel, and in this case, I have in mind people like Advocate Tabani Pohu and Louis Uriri, to be employed by the Anti-Corruption Commission to prosecute certain cases for them. I mean, you may recall Louis Blom Cooper, a barrister who came out here to defend Edgar Zionai Tekere. He was a leading QC in the UK in private practice, but there were many occasions when government, the Crown Prosecution Services enlisted its services to prosecute certain cases.
So why are we seeing the Anti-Corruption Commission doing more of that to beef up their skills and their capacity to prosecute corruption cases?
I think a lot of it has to do with lack of political will. Whoever is at the helm at any given moment has got to have the courage to realize, after due consultations have taken place. In this case, I'm talking about President Mnangagwa, sitting down with Lois Matanda Moyo and saying, have you got the wherewithal, capacity-wise and otherwise, to follow through on the investigations that get carried out? And we have the good fortune in the sense that President Mnangagwa has a legal background, and he's arguably the longest-serving Minister of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs in this country. So he ought to be aware of the shortcomings of prosecution teams within the AG's office and so forth. So you just have to be bold enough to seek help where you can get it. In the same way that Robert Gabriel Mugabe, as president, took the bull by the horns in 1981 and brought in Philip Telford Georges as Chief Justice, from one of the small Caribbean islands. But at the time that he came here, he'd been serving as Chief Justice of Tanzania.
How do you explain the lack of political will and the courage to deal with an issue that is a cancer on our society, Much?
In a lot of instances, it's maybe, I can only guess, Trevor, it's maybe fear of antagonizing certain sectors, that one may rely upon for support come the next round of elections. And in a way, I didn't have that problem, during the 5 years that I served as mayor, because this time I stumbled onto anything that was not right. I just descended on it, on the issue, like a ton of bricks, without fear of failure, because, I wasn't seeking a political office. I was there, through a special dispensation that I think I explained last time when we spoke.
Yeah.
So I think there has to be a realization on the part of leaders of these political parties once they become heads of the executive after being elected, they need to make sure that that fear factor, is removed. They mustn't be afraid of letting the law take its course against certain individuals, because those individuals happen to come from a province that will bring in X number of votes.
No sacred cows, Much, as far as corruption is concerned. That ought to be the thing. Yeah,
absolutely. But the nature and extent of the corruption that has become so endemic in our country has a lot to do with the patronage system that took deep root. I'm sorry to say. Well, I'm not sorry to say this, but I have to say it. And now late President Mugabe, perfected the art of this patronage thing. He had so much hold on his ministers. One hears all sorts of stories about how he kept dossiers of misdemeanors committed or perpetrated by his ministers, and then they became totally and utterly beholden to him. At his mercy, literally eating out of his palm.
Well, we hope and pray, Mush, that the Constitutional Court will help us, deal effectively with this issue of corruption. Let's move on now, Mush, to our society is at a crossroads. Some people say we are at a tipping point, and that we might just fall over the cliff edge. There's so much tension. And like you've said, Mush, you would think that we have a civil war. We are at war with ourselves. How do we normalize this society? How do we normalize this country? How do we move on from where we are right now? Is a transitional authority the way? Is running elections differently the way? How do we get rid of this toxicity, this hate, this breakdown in law and order?
Trevor, I was cheerfully hoping that you wouldn't throw that kind of fastball at me because there's so many ideas that have been bandied about, the transitional authority and this and the other. But you see, as you know, I don't hold any brief for any political party.
Sure.
But from where I sit, Trevor, one of the first things that we need to do to address the kind of problems that are bedeviling our country is to go back to brass tacks about introducing genuine meritocracy. Looking around and making sure we get the right people for the right jobs. That I think would go a long way, because if people get into any position in any given institution and they know that they're on merit, then they're not going to be forever looking over their shoulder as you could be snapping at their heels. I mean, let's look at the recent initiative which was undertaken by Busiso Busimoyo in terms of getting our ambassadors to focus more on business. And then you look at some of the individuals that were handpicked or earmarked to drive that process. And you have individuals whose images, professionally and otherwise, were irredeemably tarnished whilst they were here on account of not anything but what they themselves did or were associated with. And we seriously think that those individuals are going to go and market Zimbabwe as well and aggressively as they should? It just won't happen. So you have a situation where certain senior members of the security system, securocrats, who are now representing us in this, that, and the other country. And you say to yourself, are they the right people to actually be marketing Zimbabwe? What track records have they got? What pedigree have they got when it comes to marketing, Zimbabwe? Those are the kind of things that are not doing us any good as a country. We say the right things, but we do exactly the opposite. So we need to take stock of all these solid institutions that have served this country so well, and have a good and thorough look at them. What is it that used to make the State Lotteries Fund, do what it was set out to do? what is it that is to make ZimDef, Zimbabwe Manpower Development Fund, do what it was set out to do? And before, its operations from a funding perspective got horribly compromised by whoever happened to be minister at a given time. Because a lot of the ministers, sadly, they regard parastatals that come under their respective ministries as some kind of piggy banks.
Well, that's a culture, Mooch. I mean, it must come. The buck must stop at the top.
Trevor, I'm sorry I have to interrupt you there. Culture is not the word.
It's not the
word. It's a malaise.
Okay.
It's a malaise. It's a disease. Because if we call it a culture, we're clocking it with respectability and make it sound respectable.
Okay.
So we need to go back to all these institutions, be it the University of Zimbabwe, there are many. And the parastatals themselves, the NRZ. What was NRZ's primary role? And you say to yourself, at its peak, NRZ moved bulk commodities. And there's a model that's in place, Trevor. It actually breaks my heart to see what's happened to NRZ now. Because the model that was put in place and due to work like a charm is that all the companies whose business includes moving bulk commodities like Indura Nickel Corporation, Zimbabwe Alloys, Tonga Tullet, and so forth, they had more than a passing interest in NRZ operations, and that's why they invested in locals and wagons and everything else. And don't you remember, Trevor, growing up, seeing wagons passing through Bulawayo from Risco Steel?
Of course.
On their way to pick up coking coal from Wanki. And that's the kind of setup that we need.
Yeah, I tell people, Mooch, that when I went to Mzilikazi High School, my school bus left Magwegwe at 7.5 minutes past 7. If you were there at 8 minutes past 7, it was gone, and it was there every day. So you're talking about. I mean, that's a small part of our lives. That's just gone, somewhere. Look at what Zupco looks like now. So I hear you loud and clearly on that. And how do we get our politicians to talk to each other?
I think one of the basic and necessary things that we need to do, Trevor, is to depoliticize things and get our politicians across the divide to be at an event, say, where they will discover common interests. Maybe I can give you an example of one such event that occurred not so long ago. We had the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee comprising members of the House of Assembly drawn from both ZANU-PF and MDC, and support staff from Parliament, visiting the Lawfeld sugar operations. That was quite an eye-opener. And the contingent numbered a total of, I think about 36, including the support staff. And the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee concerned was led by the exuberant and youthful Justice Mayor Wajgadiana. And it included the irrepressible and mercurial Temba Peter Mliswa. And they arrived on a Wednesday. And in my capacity as chairman of Zimbabwe Sugar Association, I was there, and we showed them around, and they were gobsmacked, all of them without exception. And those are the kind of things that we need to encourage more of. Next time should be a trip to Zimplats, to wherever there's meaningful economic and industrial activity, so that these members of the House of Assembly and members of the Senate and the securocrats and they get to appreciate what it is that drives this economy. Because a number of them, through no fault of their own, I may sound as if I'm being arrogant here, but it's true. A lot of them haven't been exposed to how the fiscus, generates revenue. All that they want is, they think there's a bottomless pit full of money, where once they get elected and they demand to have those Ford Rangers or whatever the in vogue chariot is, then the fiscus will provide. But they need to be exposed to these things. You can only make it better and not destroy it. We now have a seriously anomalous situation, Trevor, with the agrarian revolution, which got underway in 2000. And I don't know how many institutions of tertiary and higher education we've got that focus on agriculture. We've got Kweni, we've got Mlezu, we've got Chidero, we've got Alvord, we've got Ushinga Pigelela. But are we prioritizing the needs of those graduates that are churned out by those agricultural colleges? Those should be the first in the queue when it comes to allocation of farms, these offer letters, and the allocation of agricultural equipment. Not me. If you gave me a piece of land today, Trevor,
you'd mess it
and
up.
the equipment to go with it, I wouldn't even know where to start.
Exactly.
Because I'm a townie. I grew up playing tennis, table tennis, basketball, swimming, playing a bit of cricket here and then in Blower. Thank God I was born and brought up. I don't know where to start. I've never milked a cow. So those are the kind of those are the kind of things that we should be focusing on. Right now, our president had occasion, I think, on Heroes Day and even on Defense Forces Day, to say all idle agricultural land is going to be repossessed. Yes, let's repossess it and reallocate it to the people that have got the wherewithal to do something about it.
To the right people, the people that have been educated to farm, have the skills and they have the passion.
And there's a model of how successful that scheme can be, the Middle Sabi. Jack Quinton started that. And sadly, when he started it just favored the white boys who graduated from Kwebi College of Agriculture. But those white boys who were dispatched to Middle Sabi, and Jack Quinton put his neck on the block without dipping into his pockets. It was his integrity that was the collateral that persuaded the financial institutions to make the money available for those white boys to go and establish what became a very, very successful agricultural scheme in Middle Sabi. The land was there, provided by the then, I think it was Agricultural Rural Authority, and the water was there abstracted from nearby Sawe River. And all those boys were just told, you got the skills, we're going to provide you with the capital, and it's not gratis, you're going to pay it back. And right down to a man, Trevor, those boys became millionaires. Wow. And I know this because they're key customers of Julie's.
Wow, amazing. Much, you've had an illustrious career, 40 years as chairman and director of quoted companies, professional organizations and charitable organizations. For young people looking at you now, Much, as a role model, what leadership lessons would you impart to them? What kind of mentorship and guidance would you give? What advice would you give to them? We live with our kids, want instant success, microwave lives. You click your finger, you've arrived at your dream, but life doesn't happen like that. It has taken you 40 years to be what you are right now. What advice would you give to these young people that watch this show?
The main advice, Trevor, is there are no shortcuts. That's point number one. Point number two is to be passionate about anything that you do and to be patient at the same time. I was extremely lucky, Trevor. I'll be the first to admit that. I've been well mentored. I had mentors like Dr. Hugh Ashton in Bulawayo, Roy Pascolanda at Anglo, Jeremy Broom at Gil Collington and Gerrans, and prior to that, Andrew Lang at university and Professor Dick Christie. So, but the other thing that I must say, although it may sound unbelievable or silly, is my passion for sport opened a lot of doors for me. It really opened a lot of doors for me, because you will recall that all these things that I got involved in, it was long before independence. But my passion for sport, tennis, and other disciplines, that then became the common denominator with people that I came into contact with. And that's one thing about sport, Trevor. When you play sport, you develop an abiding respect for your opponents, and you learn to win or lose with grace. And the people that you come into contact with will not forget you. I mean, most of the lasting relationships that exist were forged through sport.
Tell me about these mentors, Much. Did you seek them out? How did you find these mentors? Because I think that's another challenge that young people have.
I'm glad you asked that question. With Andrew Lang, it was through tennis. He was my senior lecturer, and we used to play tennis together religiously every Wednesday. You know, it was the lecturers, two of them, Andrew Lang and Chris Messer versus myself and either Peter Lloyd or Ian Donovan. And then with that, Andrew Lang used to invite us to his farm. He was one of those lucky guys who got married to wealthy females, and the wife used to farm out in Yamira. And so they used to organize tennis parties, and that's how I met Roy Lander. And I was conspicuous by my blackness at all those gatherings, you know, but I was a damn good tennis player, and people sit up and take note. And also, you know, the dinners that Dick Christie used to organize. This is way back in 1971, Trevor, don't forget, and we're only 19. And you learn how to interact with your superiors and certain types of people and so forth. And of course, depending on how well you conduct yourself, you leave a lasting impression on the people that you come into contact with. And that's the beginning of networks, you know. And then
building networks is a big thing.
Yes, that's where it all starts. Yeah. Even today, Trevor, I mean, you'll probably laugh when I tell you that in my iPhone, I've got 2,210 contacts. Their full names like Trevor Busumuzi Ngube, with his date of birth, with his email address and everything.
Wow.
And those are all the sort of people that I've met over the years. You know? So going back on a more serious note to this mentoring thing, that's something that sadly, there's not enough of it happening in our country. So I have mentoring sessions with a number of people, CAs and others who are anxious to find out how I got to where I got to. But it's just having a passion for whatever it is that you're doing and doing it properly to the best of your ability. And we've picked up the pieces from where Anglo left off when Anglo exited from Zimbabwe, with a few exceptions of, you know, investments in property and so forth. At BNC, for instance, we've resuscitated the graduate learner programs that Anglo introduced way back in the mid-1970s. And this can be done, Trevor, because in 1975, when I joined Anglo and we introduced to work under Roy Lander, introduced these graduate learner schemes, we were at the height of the Liberation War. So we can do these things even now when we are faced with all these debilitating problems. And we've got graduate learner metallurgists and mining engineers and so forth. And all these things can be done by various big companies. And this is where I think we need to prevail upon the CEOs of the companies that contribute, quite a lot to the country's fiscus, to see the bigger picture issues and engage, proactively, the CEO of Zimbabwe Inc., Emerson Mnangagwa, and we rebuild our country around all these successful companies, and they're not many. You can actually count them, and make sure that those companies are given all the support that is needed from the regulatory framework point of view. Because it's all very well for our president to wax lyrical about our country being open for business. But the people that want to come in, their first port of call will be those companies that are already inside.
On the ground. Yeah.
They will say, right, how are the following companies with All Mutual, Zimplats, Tonga Tulet, the list goes on, Delta Corporation, how are they being treated by
the government? Much, as a passionate sports person, it must break your heart to see the maladministration that manifests itself in the majority of the sporting fraternities, disciplines rather. How do we correct that? Cricket, football, tennis, you name it. We tend to find the wrong people running these organizations. How do we correct that?
I think a lot has to do with making sure that the people that should be vying for office in those respective sporting disciplines are people that have got a proven track record of involvement and passion for that given discipline. Sadly, that is not the case. We have a number of people that seek office in football, in cricket, in whatever, as a stepping stone to something else, in the wider realm of politics. And as a result, those individuals are driven usually by considerations that are not remotely connected with the well-being of that particular discipline.
Much, let's move to what you're reading. This is what I'm reading at the present moment, and this is the book that I'm recommending. It's a book that I think every Zimbabwean leader, every politician should read. And it's at the issues that you and I have been talking about at the heart of this book. With good, inclusive institutions, countries succeed. With extractive, corrupt institutions, countries fail. At the height of our failure is the fact that we failed to build institutions that are based on merit and that are inclusive. What books are you reading, Much? Or what books have you read that you'd want to recommend to your book-loving viewers?
The lockdown, the COVID-19 induced lockdown has been a blessing in disguise because it has given me an opportunity, I'm sure, just like you, to dig into your collection of books and catch up. I've just gone through The State of Africa by Martin Meredith.
Beautiful book.
And yes, he takes stock of where each of the 52, 53, 54 countries are since they attained Uhuru. And I think that should be compulsory reading for anybody who aspires to be a politician. That's the one. That's one. Tell it the other way.
Sorry.
The other way, yeah. That's the one. Yeah. And that's quite an intimidating book, and but I've read it cover to cover, and I've also read and become quite a fan of Greg Mills of the Brandhurst Foundation, which, as you know, is sponsored by Nikki Oppenheimer. And the two books that he, together with others like Olusegun Obasanjo, and I think Tendai Biti contributed to one of them. There's one that says, it's got another intimidating title, Making Africa Work. And the more recent one that I've also gone through is Why Africa Has Failed. And there's some very useful tips that come out of all the three books about the pitfalls that we need to avoid as a nascent democracy. And I think it should be compulsory reading, for anyone who ventures into the public sector, offering to do something altruistic for the benefit of the citizens, as opposed to lining their own pockets.
Wow. Muchadeyi Masunda, what a great conversation we've had. We've touched on so many issues, and I have no doubt that the viewers all over the world are going to absolutely love this conversation. Much, let me thank you for finding the time for the second time to spend time with me on In Conversation with Trevor. Allow me now to turn to our viewers who are on the continent, who are in Zimbabwe, and then in the diaspora, who follow this weekly show, to remind them that for you not to miss out on any of these quality conversations, please click on this red button and subscribe, and then you'll get an alert every time we have some of these quality shows. So until the next show, cheers to you all.